So this week we are talking about the Southern economy. Last week we looked at the Northern economy and we're comparing the differences between the two that would eventually lead to the Civil War. And we talked last week about how the Northern economy was based on factories and manufacturing and making things. There was a lot of cities in the North. This week we are going to talk about the Southern economy, and we're going to talk specifically in this PowerPoint today about slavery. This video is going to be about slavery. The Southern economy was based on agriculture and farming, and the biggest two crops were tobacco and cotton. And cotton in the 1800s was it was such a big thing that it earned the nickname of King Cotton. And in fact, some historians would argue that the first cause of the Civil War was the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney in the late 1790s. And so once the cotton gin was invented, the Southern economy wanted more and more and more slaves because they could produce lots more cotton and it made them lots of money. So this video today is going to be specifically about the institution of slavery, the horribleness of slavery, and how that affected the Southern economy. This first slide that you see here is a couple of primary source examples of actual advertisements in newspapers and in the local communities would have up certain signs for people to come and look at that would be like billboards for us today of different advertisements of things. And the one on the left here you can see says Negroes for sale, and it says specifically who they are and gives a description. The one on the right here you can see it says to be sold on board the ship, and it gives the name of the ship on Tuesday the 6th of May. And then it says, choice Negroes just arrived from the Windward and Rice Coast. The utmost care has already been taken, and that they'll be continued to keep them free from the least danger of being infected with the smallpox. So in other words, they were keeping the slaves healthy, and therefore they were worthwhile buying. Before the slaves arrived in America, they were taken from their homes in Africa, and oftentimes when they were rounded up along the west coast of Africa, they were put into these neck braces called coffles, and they would be marched from their homes inland in West Africa to the shore, to the west coast, where they would be loaded up into ships to be taken across the ocean to America. And you can see from both of these pictures what these coffles often looked like. They were very often really wide, so that if a slave tried to run away, it would be very difficult for them to run through the brush and things like that. You were also usually attached to other slaves at the same time. So in order to run away, it would have to be 2 or 3 slaves running away at the same time. It would be very difficult. We talked earlier in the year about the Middle Passage, and the Middle Passage is important to talk about once again here because the Middle Passage is what fuels slavery in the South. Now, an important note to make, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the year, is in the year 1808, the United States outlawed importing slaves from other countries. And even though slavery was still legal for another 60 or so years, they outlawed bringing slaves from other countries. But up until 1808, there were millions of slaves brought from West Africa to the United States and to South America and Central America as well. And this map gives you a good idea of what the Middle Passage looked like. You can see from this red shaded area, all of these were slaves coming from West Africa to the different parts of the Americas. About 20 million Africans were forced to make the Middle Passage, and only about half of them actually survived the voyage across the ocean. It was such a horrible voyage that many of them died along the way. Many of the slave traders treated them much more like cattle than they did human beings, and as a result, many of the Africans died on the journey. You can see from this picture the horrificness of how the Africans would be packed into the ships, and you can see that they're side by side, very little room to move. In fact, the picture here says that the slaves were stowed on shelves, and below them they only had a height of about 2 feet 7 inches between them and the beams. So the area they had to sleep and to be every day was less than 3 feet when they were laying down. So think about that when you lay on your bed. If you're looking up above you, you would have maybe a foot of space between you and what's above you. This picture you can see on the left hand side here. The left hand picture is what it may have looked like when they were laying side by side with virtually no room between them and what was above them. You can understand in these types of terrible conditions why many of them died along the way. On the right hand side here is a couple more examples of some of the neck braces and the coffles that would be used to if slaves acted out, they might have one of these muzzle type things put on them, or one of these coffles with the spikes at the end, so that it would be much more difficult for you to run away. Once the slaves arrived in the Americas, they were often sold at auctions, and they were lined up and put out in front of people and just sold like right after pigs and cows and other animals were sold. And this primary source is another example of one of those advertisements. It says auction today to be sold in the main cafeteria of Mountain Brook High School. This could say Northern Lebanon High School or anything like any other high school back in the 1700s and early 1800s. A choice cargo of about 150 fine, healthy Negroes just arrived from the western unincorporated areas. The utmost care has been taken and shall be continued to keep them free of the least danger of being infected by the pox. Here's referring to smallpox, which was a disease that killed many people in the 17 and 1800s. And again, you see, look at the bottom of this advertisement. It says this is sponsored by your student council and faculty to put up an advertisement to sell slaves. The slave auctions would often look like this picture on the left, where you would have families separated from each other. They're standing up on the auction block while people sit around and decide whether they want to buy them. Maybe the saddest thing about this picture is that you can see in the background here this family being split up, and you have men just kind of half paying attention as people's lives are being ruined. You see these men over here having a conversation, not really that interested. A couple of men over here are not even paying attention as well, and it's a very, very sad way that these families were split up at the slave auctions. Once the slaves were sold, they oftentimes would go to the plantation, and that's where they would work for the rest of their lives. On the left-hand side, you can see this man. It's a picture of a man. Those aren't things growing on his back. Those are the marks and the scars from him having been whipped over and over again, to the point where his back just created these growths to protect against the whip that continually hit him. And on the right hand side, you can see women picking cotton, which all throughout the 1800s was the number one thing that drove the economy of the South, was the picking of cotton and the selling of cotton to be used to make textiles and cloth items like clothing. When slaves ran away, if you worked on the plantation, you worked in one of three places. You either worked in the fields, which was the worst place you could work. You worked as a skilled craftsman or a tradesperson. You might be a blacksmith, or you might run the cotton gin or something like that. If you were a slave that was able to be a skilled craftsperson, that was the second worst place to be. But the best place to be was in the house. If you worked in the house, for the master. Oftentimes you were able to sleep in the house at night because you took care of the master's children, or you were the cook or something like that. And so those were the three places on the plantation that you could be. Now, as you can imagine, lots of slaves tried to run away because this was a horrible life. And so when they ran away, what would happen would be that the owner would often take out an ad in the newspaper to try to recover their slave. And here's an example of one. This says, to the jail of Loudoun County, a runaway on the 4th instance, a Negro lad who calls himself Joe. He's about 17 or 18 years of age, 5 feet 10 or 11 inches higher, slender made, light complexion, had on when committed a pair of linen overalls, a roundabout jacket, both considerably worn, with coarse shoes, nearly new, and an old wool hat. Says he belongs to Presley Helm near Millwood, Frederick County, Virginia. The owner of said Negro is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away. Otherwise, he will be disposed of according to the law. This actually is not the slave owner looking for a slave. This is an advertisement from the jail itself that recovered this slave, and says, and they're putting an advertisement in the newspaper to have the owner come and claim its slave. And it also, as I mentioned, worked the other way, where slave owners would put advertisements in the paper to find their slaves. This is a different kind of slave ad here. This one says, "Caution, colored people of Boston. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchman of police officer of Boston, for since the recent order of the mayor aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers." Now, what's happening in this advertisement is the people of Boston, Massachusetts in the north, where slavery was already illegal, they were very much against slavery, most of the people there. And the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, we're going to learn about later in the year, said that even in free states, you had to help get runaway slaves and send them back to the South. And this is an advertisement put out by the people of Boston saying, hey, if you are a runaway slave, they're trying to round you up and send you back. So be aware. Don't let yourself get caught, is essentially what this advertisement is saying. And finally, this idea of slavery, it's important for us to understand that slavery still exists in the world today. Slavery isn't something that went away after the Civil War. While it did go away in the United States for the most part after the Civil War, slavery still exists in many countries around the world today. And even in the United States, there are illegal slave rings that are still happening today. And so it's really important for us to study slavery and to try to understand it a little bit, because we should still be striving to make sure we get rid of slavery in the world totally today. And the importance of understanding how slavery affected our country, specifically the South, and it would eventually lead to the Civil War, is why we study about this. So go ahead and take the quiz that goes along with this video, and if you need to, go back and watch the video again, and then take the quiz that goes along with it.